you'll notice it's installing a bunch of packages. It's sort of laying some stuff down, and it says, cool, you are ready to go. So if we were to take a look, let's do a little guided tour of our new project that just got created. So really what happened is it created all the files that we need, which we're going to see, initialized a new stack in our Pulumi account called dev, and it installed all the package dependencies we needed from NPM. If we had done a Python, it would have pulled them from PyPy. If it was Git packages, it would, or sorry, Git Go packages, it would do all the Go packages it needs. It's all that stuff that normally happens. So cool. So now, if we kind of take a look, the first file we want to look at is the index.ts. This is the entry point to our program. This is where we're going to write all of our code. You'll see we've got a package.json and our package lock, just normal NPM node kind of stuff. Tells all the packages. This is all the stuff Pulumi did for us. The Pulumi.yaml is the metadata. And right now, really all that's in there is just its name. What runtime is it using? And then we have our node modules, which we don't even have to look at, but that's all of our installed NPM dependencies, just like any other kind of fun node project that we might be doing. So if we were to take a look at index.ts, so this is our big bad Pulumi program so far. All we're doing there is we're just it's just importing the Pulumi package and saying get ready to go. It's not doing anything yet. So the only file that we're going to be working with by hand in this workshop is this index.ts. This is where we're writing our code. So if we want to interact with Azure, because this is the Azure workshop, so we have to install the Azure native provider. And I want to take 1 second to talk about what we mean by a native provider. So there's different kinds of providers in Pulumi, and a provider is basically a package. It's a way to use your programming language of choice to interact with resources, whether they're things like clouds like Kubernetes, or if it's platforms like Kubernetes, maybe it's DigitalOcean, maybe it's Azure, maybe it's something like PagerDuty or Cloudflare or anything like that. A native provider is one that is built using the API spec directly of that provider. So what's cool with the Azure native provider, as an example, that provider gets built nightly based upon the API spec, which means as soon as there is a resource made available in Azure that's new, it is in Pulumi almost immediately, like within 24 hours. Very, very powerful stuff. But we want to use this thing. So let's go ahead and install it. So we're going to do an npm install. We're going to install Pulumi / Azure native. This is just going to go ahead and say, cool, npm install, pull down that package, shove that in our node modules, add it to our package.json, means we get to use it now. Very cool. It's going to take a hot second because, internet. Now, while this is happening, one of the things that we do with Pulumi is there's configuration, right? There's things that might be different. Again, we talked about them being different from stack to stack, but like one of the things that we can set, in fact, one of the things we have to set for the Azure providers, we have to say what location do we want to provision our stuff in? What Azure location where is this stuff supposed to go? It really shouldn't be taking this long to install a npm package. Git pod. Come on, get with the program here. So as soon as I get my console back from trying to install npm packages through the wonders of code, we're going to go ahead and we're going to set where that is. Okay, cool. So it just took a second, but it's there. Cool. So now, and again, if we were to look back at our package.json, see, we have that in there. It's available to us. Awesome. Let's go ahead. We want to set our location. And so we're going to run this command here at the terminal, which is we're going to say Pulumi config set, and it's Azure native. So we're saying this is a configuration for that provider. Set it to location West US. Use whatever Azure location is appropriate for you. Now, here's the thing that happened. You may have noticed, eagle eyes, that there is now a file called Pulumi.dev.yaml. So this is the configuration overrides, if you will, that are for this particular stack. So if we look in there, you can see it's set Azure native location to West US. So let's say I had a stack called prod, and let's say I put that in not a different location, it could be set differently. That's what, go ahead, and now we've got ourselves basically set up to go. So In this next part, we're going to deploy some static HTML files to Azure using Azure Storage. Maybe not a thing you do in your day to day, but it's a relatively quick thing to be able to do. Mostly because just from a cloud resource perspective, doesn't take that long to spin up these resources. Versus if we were going to create like an AKS cluster, that might take 20 minutes for Azure to do that. So first thing we need to do, this is going to be constant for most anything we're doing in Azure here, should come as not a big surprise, is we need to create a resource group, which is what we're going to use for all the resources we're going to provision. So we're saying, okay, all this stuff we're going to create, that's going to go into a resource group. So in order to do that, we kind of need to have a resource group. So the first thing we need to do with that is we need to tell our TypeScript program how to use Azure. So we're going to say we're going to import as resources. This is for our resource group, and it's from Pulumi Azure native resources. We're not importing the entire Azure native package. We're just saying just the thing that we need. We just need resources. That's Pulumi Azure native resources. Now we're going to create our resource group. So we're in TypeScript, and so we're going to call it resource group because we are creative, and it's going to be a new resources, and it's a resource group. Now look at this. This is interesting. You're like, oh, this is cool, Manny. I didn't realize that we installed the awesome Pulumi plugin to Visual Studio Code to give us all this type ahead stuff. No, we didn't, because this is just in the package. This is the beauty of using a programming language like TypeScript or Go or .NET or Python in this, is that because we imported that package, we get it just like any other package, any other class, any other thing that we get. So we get all of our type ahead, which is amazing. So we get our resources, and we're going to do a restart resource group, and we're going to call it app, because that's the world we live in. So this, if we were to run this Pulumi program, it would create a new resource group called app. Cool. Very exciting. Not a whole lot of work yet, but we got to start somewhere. Now we have a resource group, and we want to add an Azure storage account where we're going to shove all of this amazing HTML content for our static website. So we need to be able to get, now remember, we did resources for the resource group stuff, but now we need storage. So we're going to import Azure native storage, which lets us now use that. And we're going to create a storage account. So we're going to call it storage account, and it is a new storage account, and we're going to also call this one app, and we're going to set a couple parameters around it. So we're going to say enable HTTPS traffic only, of course, because this is 2021. We are going to set the kind, and it is a storage kind storage v2, and the resource group name. So we have to set a resource group name. Now, we remember we called it app, but maybe it'd be cool to access this programmatically. So if we go and remember, we created that constant called resource group, and then if we take name from it, that will go ahead and put that in there. And then we need the SKU, which is going to be name is storage SKU name, and it's just going to be a standard LRS. Go ahead and close that out. Okay, so a couple things I want to show you what we did here. Now, remember, you might say, well, Maddie, that's cool that you got the resource group name, but you could have just copied app. You knew it was called app. But here's what's going to happen. Pulumi auto-generates unique names for things, so you don't have a namespace collision, right? So you'll see the resource group when we create it. If you were to look, it wouldn't actually be called app. It'd be called app dash some type of identifier. Now you can override that if you need to. We don't generally recommend it because you don't want to have, this is a way of making sure you don't end up with a namespace collision across something as generic as resource group in your entire thing. So being able to access that programmatically here is really powerful. So now we've got our storage account, but we want to add another resource, which is going to be a storage account static website. It's very similar, and we're just going to go ahead and create our new one, which is going to be, we're going to call this one static website, which is going to be a new storage account static website, which we're going to call my first app. We're so clever and creative. And so the account name is going to be, remember, we just created storage account up there. Let's go ahead and grab it. Cool. We can get that account name for that. And it needs a resource group, right? Which is, can anybody guess how we're going to do that? Yes, we're just going to go ahead and grab resource group name, just like we did above. It needs an index document, and we're going to say good old index.html. No throwback to old school Microsoft default.asp. Shout out. And the 404 document is 404.html. And that ends us up there. So that gets us, we've created our static website, which is a thing. Now, the final step is to upload some files. So we created that storage account static website, the static website thing. We want to loop through all the files in our sample app and upload them. So if you notice, we have the files in that content directory, which is what we're going to end up using. And that gives us, or not, sorry, not in our content directory. Sorry, there's the www root directory, has our 404, has our index.html. We're going to go ahead and be using those in a second. So remember, we are now in a real programming language, JavaScript. Your opinions on whether or not that's a real programming language is for a different discussion. But because we can do that, we can map over, we can iterate, we can do loops, we can do conditionals. And in this case, we're going to do a map of our two files that we want to use. And because we're going to use some very similar things rather than having to do this one at a time. So it's going to look a little like this. We're going to say, we know we have an index type.html. We have 404.html are our two files we're going to use. And we're going to do a .map so that we can map and we can take across all of these. So we're going to say for each one, it's going to be name. And for each of these, we're going to create a new storage, a new storage blob, right? So it's new, not blog, it's a new blob, which is name. And if the resource group name, yes, resource group dot name. Then we need to say what is the account name, which is static storage account name. Then the container name for that is going to be the container name of our static website. So that's static website container name. And then the source, where is this coming from? So we're going to do a new Pulumi asset, which is basically just saying use something at the file system level. And it's a file asset. And its location is ... www root / and then we're going to expand out, do the string interpolation of getting the value of name that we were just using. Got that, we've got that. And the content type is text HTML. Got it. Good. Okay, so begin. So like we're able to say do this for, because it's a map, right? So we can say do the same thing twice, but just interpolate in the name of the file that we're using. So this gives us that ability rather than having to create two different individual resources. Now it might sound pretty straightforward. I mean, I hope it does, but really this is powerful. So at this point, we've got our whole Pulumi program. We've gone ahead. We're using the Pulumi package where we've got our thing for our resource group. We're using some storage. We created our resource group. We created our storage account with static website. And now we have our files in that. So at this point, if we were to say, we've defined our infrastructure. So we want to use the Pulumi command line to actually create these resources. So if we run Pulumi up. Remember, make sure you're in your app directory here, in your program directory. And then we say Pulumi up. And you're going to see something, it's going to run a little bit like this. So first of all, that view live, if you were to click on that, everything we're seeing in the console is available in the Pulumi web interface. So if you wanted to show that to somebody else, someone wanted to see what was up with that, we're cool just looking in the console here. So it's going to say, this is doing what, when you run Pulumi up the first time like this, it's going to run basically a preview. It's going to say, cool, if I run this program, Maddie, here's what's going to happen. I've got 6 resources that I want to create. I need to create a stack because we don't have that stack yet. I need to create a resource group, a storage account, the static website, and then 2 blobs for the 2 files. So I can, if I were to go in here even and say, do I want to see the details? We can see in depth everything that it's going to do, what the URLs are going to be, all that good stuff. So we're going to say, yes, go ahead and perform this update. And which means it's going to fire out there into my Azure sub. It's going to create that resource group, create that storage account, do all of the things that we've asked it to do, because computers are nice and they do what we tell them, whether what we told them is what we meant in the first place or not. So cool stuff happening there. Okay, it's chugging away. Now, what we're going to do next while this is thinking, okay, cool. So we got our infrastructure, but I don't know where it is. I mean, I know it's in Azure and I could go in the console, I could poke around, but that sure does not seem very infra-codey to me. So we can export values from our Pulumi stack so we can see them as an output, and we can either throw those out just to hit in the command line. We can actually pass them around from Pulumi program to Pulumi program, which we aren't going to do right there, but we're going to go ahead and say, let's go ahead and get the endpoint from that website we created. So we're going to export a constant called URL, and that's going to take the primary endpoints from that storage account. So if we were to go ahead and run Pulumi up again, you're going to see that it's going to now say, okay, so the cool thing is, what do you think Pulumi is going to have anything that needs to do? Spoiler alert, it shouldn't, because we didn't change anything. Our infrastructure is in the state we want it to be, but it did say, if you run this, there's a new output, which is that URL. So we're going to go ahead and run that. Granted, yes, I could just copy paste that, but I want to show you how we can use this stack output. So it didn't really have to do much of anything. So now if I were to say, let's curl the Pulumi stack output URL, because remember we had a very constant called URL. So if we take the value of Pulumi stack output of URL, pass that to curl. Also helpful if you don't try to use braces, Maddie, because you are not writing JavaScript, you are doing Bash. And ta-da, we actually have a website. So now we can all go put web developer on our LinkedIn and get paid the big bucks. All right, we're going to do one more cool thing here. So that was fun, but let's do some Docker, because you can't DevOps without Docker. So in that, what we did, we deployed our static HTML files. And this next part, we're going to deploy that exact same HTML to an Azure app service using Docker. We're going to build the Docker image using Pulumi and upload it to the Azure Container Registry. So lots of fun stuff going on here. Now, we need an app service plan in our resource group. But if we want to do that, we need to bring in the web package, because that's what's going to let us do that stuff. So we're going to add Azure Native /web as web, so we can use that. And then we need a plan. So our plan, we can just do this at the end. We're going to go ahead and keep our other deployment happening. Our static website can still exist in blob storage. This is a yes and situation. So we're going to create our plan, and this is going to be a new web app service plan, which is going to be called plan, because I am so creative. And the resource group name is going to be resource group.name. The kind for this plan is going to be, we're going to do this on Linux. Do reserved is true. And then the SKU here is going to be the name, is B1. And the tier is basic. Should be more than sufficient for our little static website. Oops. And doop and doop. Okay, cool. So we got ourselves an app service plan. Man with plan. Now, Panama. All right, cool. So we've created our plan. That's the end of that. No big deal. Everything's cool. We want to build our Docker container. And we already have, so in that www root directory, there is a Docker file. So we're going to use that Docker file. But before we do that, we wanted to find a container registry where we're going to put that Docker image. So we need to add container registry to our imports up at the top. So we'll go ahead and import container registry because that's what we're going to be making. And for this one, we're just going to go ahead and some of these I'm going to do a little copy pasting because you don't need to sit and watch me type all day. But this is nothing terribly new that we did here. We're still using the same resource group variable or value that we had before. And we're just creating a registry called registry. Now, this is where things might get kind of interesting. Actually, hopefully it's been interesting all along, but we're going to do something else kind of cool now. We need to get our credentials from this registry. I created a registry, but if I want to push my Docker image up to it, I need creds, right? And we want to only grab the creds once the registry's been created. Pulumi does not necessarily like boom, 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 boom. It tries to run things in parallel as much as possible, but trying to access and use those credentials when we don't even have the registry yet, you can guess would not go so well. So Pulumi has a mechanism for this called an apply call. And you can chain multiple apply calls using all. So what we're going to do here is we want to grab those registry credentials that we just created. So we're going to call that credentials. And now here, instead of doing a new, we're going to do, it's going to be Pulumi.all. And we're going to grab that off of the resource group name, registry name. And then if we stick our apply on this, and then bear with me here for a second. And I want to do resource group name, registry name. Oops. Container registry is then we're going to pull the list registry credentials. And then the resource group name of that is going to be resource group name. And the registry name is going to be registry name. Cool. And then we should end up with a let me just see, what did we get wrong here? There should be paren there. And that's one too many parens. Okay. So because we did this apply on the apply all, it's going to wait for all those other things to be working. So, and then we want to we've got those values. That's cool. Let's do something with them. So we're going to say that admin username is credentials. But again, we're doing this apply, which is what's making sure that it's not going to try to set that value until credentials, username, bang, and then we're just going to take the password the same way. It's going to look kind of like this. Okay, so that gets us our credentials. So now we can actually do something with this registry. So finally, what we want to do is our registry is ready to store our Docker image. So maybe we should make one and push it up there. So we need to add a new provider. So we're going to, we've been using Azure stuff so far. We need a new provider. which is Docker. So we'll do npm install Pulumi Docker, right? So that's going to get us installed. While that's going, of course, we need to add that to our imports so that we can actually use it. And we just do that with import dash dash or import stars Docker. Cool. Now we want to define our Docker resource, right? So we're going to say const image is a new Docker image called app. We're going to set our parameters for this. So the image name is, so we're going to use this Pulumi.interpolate, which is letting us take some info that we have here. So we can take from that registry that we created, we'll get its login server. Cool. And then we're going to take app and we want the tag of latest on that because, of course, we do. Let's see, do we get that Pulumi interpolate? Yep, I think that's right. And then for the build, the context that we're passing that is going to be www root, so it knows where to find our Docker file. And the registry that we're going to push it to should come as no big surprise that the server is the registry login server. The username is admin username, and the password for that is admin password. Okay. 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 All right. Build. That's why. There we go. So telling it the image, what we want to call the image, where to get the Docker file from, and what registry to push it to. So now we want to actually deploy that Docker container, and we're going to use Azure's web app service for that. So we're using the web resource again, which we already have imported because we used it earlier. So we don't have to do a new import for this, just to use it. And we're going to define our web app. And for this one, this is a lot of typing, and I want to move along. So I'm just going to walk through what we're doing here. Okay, username, admin username. Why doesn't it like that? Oh, that should be admin username. There you go. Okay. So what we did here for this app is we said, okay, it has a resource group, our usual resource group. Use our plan that we created for the server farm. And then what are some of the app settings? So what's its for the site config, it's Docker registry server URL. We already have that. We know where to get the admin user. We have those credentials. And then our custom image is exposing port 80. But if we're doing something different, we want it set to always on, and it's going to be set to HTTPS only. So this is really doing a lot of the stuff that we did in the static websites on storage earlier. And so now what we've accomplished is we've got this web app defined using that plan. We've got the Docker image it's going to create. So the only thing left to do now is our friend Pulumi up, which is going to go ahead. And the first thing it's going to do is be like, cool, I've got, all your fun stuff that you've already done. So we should see a bunch of resources. It doesn't have to change from our static website we created before. And it's saying 6 unchanged, which is telling us the 4 things it would have to create. It has to create the Docker image, the registry, the plan, and the web app. So let's go ahead and let this go. This is going to take a bit of a minute. You'll notice again that existing infrastructure, our static site in our bucket, has remained unchanged. And one thing that we didn't do that we did before that might be helpful. Oh, someone has a hand raised. What's that mean? I don't know. I think someone just clicked a button. Cool. We never grabbed the URL. So how can we do that? So while this is running, let's go ahead and add that to our code. So we're going to export another constant. which is going to be the web app URL. Oops, web app URL. And then for this, we're going to do a Pulumi interpolate, our friend interpolate, and we're going to grab HTTPS $bang, then app's default host name is going to come out of that. Doot, doot. No, you go away. Okay, so that's going to now give us that new thing. So you can see everything went back up. Everything's cool. But let's go ahead and run Pulumi up again. And this way we'll go ahead and get ourselves our web app URL in just 1 second and see what's going on with that. If you have any questions, please fire them off into the chat. We'll do our best to answer them as we kind of wrap up in our last little bit. So we went ahead, we've got our web app URL should be applied as an output. And once we've done that, cool, we'll just clear this. If we were to curl that, we're going to see we've pulled that up again. So that gets us, that's what we did. Now, of course, we want to clean up after ourselves because I've just provisioned a bunch of resources in my Azure account. Maybe I don't want them to be there anymore because I'm going to forget about them until next month when my bill comes. So if I were to type in Pulumi destroy, what Pulumi destroy is going to do is it's going to take all the resources created in this stack and delete them. And so it's going to say, yep, are you sure you want to do this? I am so sure. No one's accessing that website. It hasn't made itself available on the Twitters yet. So it's going to go ahead and delete all those pieces. And then finally, what I'll be able to do is I can actually remove the entire stack, because you would see that if even though we deleted those resources, I'll go ahead and show you while this is chugging away. Hang on a second here. Yes. So those resources are being deleted. But if we go ahead and switch to look out, I don't know what I just did there. Share screen, switch screen, Chrome tab. All right, if we go back to my Pulumi, so we had this, my first, which one did I even decide to do? Here it is, my first Azure app, hello. So this was the program we were just working in. And we can kind of see in this dev stack, it just did a destroy. We can see the activity. We can see all the things that we've done. And even in the resources, you'll see there's actually no resources now because we've deleted them all. And now I'm like, all right, I want to get rid of this. I don't care about this anymore. It's time to move on with my life. So if we go back into our console here, if I were to do Pulumi stack rm dev, it says, are you sure? Like, yes, I want that stack to go away. Workshop is done. And then that way I don't have it poking around and hanging around inside my Pulumi account anymore. So how can you transfer the state file from app.pulumi locally to your project? Well, you can do a Pulumi export, which will export the current state. And then if you had a different backend set up somewhere for your state, you could then do a Pulumi import. So again, we have a bunch more. We actually have a bunch more workshops today. A little bit later, I will be doing a workshop on building a self-service cloud with Python. So we'll be creating using Pulumi's automation API to build some deployments in Kubernetes. And then also my colleague Kat Cosgrove is going to be doing a workshop on GCP instead of Azure. And then we've got something fun we're doing with our friends Nginx as well later on today. You want to continue your journey here to get started. If you go to the plumi.com/doc/get started for any cloud, anything you're doing, we have a ton of code examples on GitHub. Also go to plumi.com/registry. As we just launched the registry this week, which is full of all the different providers, all the different resources, all the things. It's one-stop shop for all the pieces and packages and parts. So thank you for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you at a future workshop. We'll see you on the internet, and keep building awesome things.